Hey, how are you? Tim Warner here yet again, and I got a really nice comment from a viewer who asked for more teaching stories that they found that they were inspiring in their own journey as a technical trainer. And you don't have to ask me twice when it comes to sharing teaching stories. It's a question of having me shut up. But I want to honor that request, and I want to talk about two students I've had and that are just their stories and the interactions I had with them were particularly notable and beneficial for me as a professional, as a teacher, and also for them. All right, so first we're going back to the late 90s, very late 90s. I was teaching at Syracuse University in their night school, their adult education division. So these were all folks who were transitioning into IT. They had day jobs, and then they would come to SU at night to attend my courses. Really good memories. And this one student named Derek in particular, he would always sit right up in front. He'd always raise his hand to volunteer. This guy was on fire. I don't remember what job or career he was in, but it had nothing to do with technology. But Derek had discovered that he had passion and aptitude and interest for IT. And sort of like my case, how I went to school thinking I was going to become a physician and realized by stumbling into IT and training that my heart's desire really lay there, you know? And so Derek knew what he wanted and he was going after it. And it's a humbling thing as an instructor to work with a learner who is on fire and really is self-motivated to learn. I think Derek was going to succeed regardless of any impediments in his way. And I just happened to be his primary instructor. And he was just a joy to teach. Certainly, I've had over the years a range of learners. I've put in my time teaching at training centers where my students are basically forced to come to training. And some of these folks are there under duress and they're grumpy and they don't even like computers and that sort of thing. Get off my lawn. And there was also students who would show up and leave for long periods of time because they thought this was an opportunity for them to play hooky from their day jobs. They're supposed to be at the training center for 3, 4, or 5 days, but they were going to just put in the minimal possible effort in class so they could do what they want. I mean, that's fine, whatever. I don't judge people on their motivations. And some people, fortunately just a few, would get caught up in ego and want to show off how intelligent they are. And as an instructor, that actually would be worth a video. Handling disruptions in class. Let me write that down. Handling classroom disruptions. Yeah, because that can be annoying. And that's something that if you're a newer instructor, you can just get steamrolled and wind up with a terrible environment for everybody if you don't nip that kind of stuff right off at the bud, you know? But all this is to say is that when you're dealing with people who come in with different motivations, and once again, I know I've said this in the past, it's such a difference, adult education versus kid education. It's just totally different situation. Adults are concerned with what's in it for me, how do I maximize my return on investment, how do I actually use this stuff I'm using in class? Whereas a typical school kid, their brains aren't even fully developed, so you can't expect them to have any kind of context. And they're being forced into the classroom, and they're not even thinking about how to apply what they're learning, most of them. At least I know I wasn't. This is why I like to be an adult educator wherever possible. So Derek wound up just skating through the whole training at SU, and wound up landing a job. SU had a placement service where they would help the graduates get into the industry. And, you know, a place as big and as situated as Syracuse University has lots of contacts throughout all of Syracuse, New York, and upstate New York. And so Derek got into his first role, and that's something else, that first break. Let me write that down as another idea for an installment of this series. because it's that first job in IT that makes all the difference, in my opinion. Especially if you're coming into that first job with no experience. You need somebody, a company, an individual, a team who's willing to take a chance on you and willing to invest in you. Excuse me. And that's what happened with Derek, and he's still going strong years later. I haven't talked to him in a while. Let me write that down. Contact Derek and Mark, the other guy I want to talk about. The other guy, Mark, this is later now, in the early 2000s, I was an adjunct instructor at ITT Tech. Now, those sort of places like ITT Tech, that place just totally wound up imploding, and students filed a class action lawsuit against the place because of tuition. I'm not going there. From my perspective, it was convenient because I was able to teach part-time at night, a group of people that I like to be around. And I don't have any opinion on ITT Technical Institute or for-profit trade schools. I really don't care. It didn't affect me in that way. I liked it because it was an opportunity to teach tech, and I did. And we had some really nice time together, my students and I. Here I'm thinking of a student named Mark. And Mark, again, was coming from a completely non-technical background, but he was a gamer. He got really deep into World of Warcraft to the point where it became kind of an addiction and it was causing him problems. So he got off of WoW and realized that his heart's desire lay in IT. And so he joined up at ITT Tech, and he was one of my students. And he was very similar to Derek in terms of he was an obviously self-motivated learner. He didn't sit front row and center like Derek did, but he was engaged. Not as much during the class periods, but off hours. He and I wound up developing a friendship. Of course, you got to keep the professionalism during the class. During the class, we didn't have the friendship, but after the class and since, we did. But I guess what's similar about both of these cases is just how much easier of time you have as an instructor when you've got a self-motivated student. I wouldn't call them unicorns, but I would call them relatively uncommon. But boy, enjoy it when you've got that kind of student in class, because as an instructor, another nice thing that's a win-win-win for everybody, and something that I did with both Mark and Derek, is that I took advantage of their enthusiasm. And when I say take advantage, I'm not talking about manipulation and coercion. I'm talking about I capitalized on the fact that they were so into it and so vocally into it and visibly into it, to where they were at times sort of my assistant instructor. That is, I knew I could rely on either of these guys if I wasn't getting a lot of classroom participation. And again, as an adult educator, it's totally understandable because you're at night. These people have a day job and families and lives going on. They're having a hard enough time staying awake, much less being engaged with the training, you know? But I've got these Spitfires like Mark and Derek, where I can call on them at any time to give an example. How are you using this? What about the material is confusing? And oftentimes these guys could speak for the rest of the class. So they wound up being a valuable peer support to the rest of the class. And that, again, is an enormously satisfying, wonderful thing as a teacher. When you see your students before class huddled in the cafeteria, or a lot of times students would form their own study groups to meet outside of class during the day or on an off night or whatever, and they would huddle together. And these particularly sharp students like Derek or Mark would lead up these groups, you see? So I know synergy is kind of one of those marketing words that turns into a cliche way too easily, but that's, I guess, what I want to leave you with. Think about not just enjoying these extra engaged students, but think of ways where you can incorporate them into the learning context, because it benefits everybody. I guarantee if you were to talk to Derek and Mark, they benefited hugely from teaching back what they're learning to other students. The other students felt more a part of. They had a peer to support rather than the status difference of an instructor-student relationship. So, I mean, there's literally no downside to that situation. It's absolutely beautiful. And I'd like to think that those extra engaged students might have at least sometimes lit a fire under the students who were least motivated and maybe gave them a spark of inspiration, a spark of energy to get further engaged in the learning process. So that was some geeky instructional stuff now. I hope that you enjoyed it and got something out of it. And I did. I got some ideas for future lessons. So thank you for that. I'll see you next time.